Hey, everybody. I'm Leland, and this is another episode of the Music That Matters podcast. Today's guest is Jahnvi Saluja. Jahnvi is a major contributor to our Music That Matters posts, where she's done analysis on a number of songs, including Enough Honey, Gully Boy, Memba for Aisha, and much more. Links in the show notes, but do take a look at her work. She's awesome and full of knowledge and honesty. I learned a lot in this podcast. Even though I'd lived in India in the past, I had barely scratched the surface of Indian music. Most of what I had been shown would be known as Bollywood, but it wasn't until I met Jahnvi that I really understood what that meant and made a deeper dive into songs like Gully Boy, Memba for Aisha, etc. And it was then that I really had a chance to also dive deeper into what Indian classical means, what those songs represent, their cultural significance, and more. While generally it might seem like Bollywood music is without meaning, at least that's what is stereotypically believed, as we're inclined to do here at SOS, we sought out the ones that do have meaning and chose to focus our ears and minds there. As a primer or retrospective to this interview, I highly suggest you go listen to the songs Jahnvi's highlighted on our website. There is so much more to experience musically, so dive in. In the podcast, we go through the differences between Indian classical and Bollywood, what it is about Bollywood music that makes it so culturally important today, and so much more. But before we begin, here's what's going on at SOS. Last week, we looked at Sia's song Puppies Are Forever, just in time for the holidays. Really interesting message and choice there. Give it a listen and check out our Music That Matters posts on our website if you feel so inclined. Next, this week, on our Instagram is devoted to the British invasion. Last week, we went into New York artists past and present with mashups of The Strokes and Ramones, Rakim and A$AP Rocky, Blondie and the Yeah Yeah Yeahs, and even Talking Heads and Vampire Weekend. Very cool stuff, so check it out. Okay, that's it. Here's Jahnvi Saluja on the cultural importance of Indian classical music and Bollywood. How'd you become interested in music and where did it all begin for you?
All right. So my parents, especially my dad, is really into Indian classical music, and he really made it clear to us that it's really important to appreciate music and how great it is. He always talks about that all the time. So we developed a liking for it just because it was playing everywhere. But since we're the newer generation, we started liking the less complicated music more, which was Bollywood for at least me. And we started looking at lyrics more than the technicalities, the vocals, and the instruments playing. And that's how I started going into looking more into the meaning
Very
of
cool.
songs.
For those who maybe don't know, how would you define Indian classical music, particularly as it relates to like Bollywood? Because I think a lot of like particularly people outside of India might have heard of Bollywood and might have heard Bollywood music and they might think, oh, that's Indian music. But it'd be interesting to hear if you could tell us a little bit more about how you view the classification between classical and Bollywood.
Okay, so you could say that Bollywood music is what is featured in the movies. Most of it is just like it's a part of a movie. So it's basically the soundtrack. And with Indian classical music, it's more of, you could say, playback, but some people, because it's like really old and because it's like centuries old, I don't know, and it's more of that it they appreciate the practice of it more than commercializing it, whereas with movies it's more of commercializing and make it more suitable to the movie. So that's my understanding of it.
Yeah, it's just so interesting because like when you think of like pop music in general, it's typically not thought of like at least coming from the US of like what's in the movies being like the stuff that's considered like pop. it's more like would be like movie soundtracks versus like what's actually listened to like more traditionally. But I love Indian classical, especially live. When I
Yeah.
was living in India, like one time I happened across this wedding that was going on, and it was like it wasn't the actual ceremony. It was like the celebration where the bride and groom were standing in the front of the room and sort of
Ah,
greeting the thousands of people or whatever it was that were coming to this wedding.
yeah.
And then everybody went downstairs and ate. And I'm walking by and I remember this couple's, I think it was the dad of the bride, um, was saw me and my friend, we're both Americans, and invited us to come to the wedding. So out of nowhere was like,
Yeah, that happens.
and it was the coolest experience of my whole life because I've never had, like, how welcoming is that when someone goes,
Yeah.
you're in our vicinity, like come party with us. And it was just so fun, like because we came in immediately, just was struck by the music, because they had like the live band in the center, so it was like the band was in the center and the bride and groom were in the front there, and there was a line
Mm,
out the door, like for people to come and give their like good wishes to the bride and groom. And it was
yeah.
so striking for me, especially because of the music. And then we went and ate the food, and the food was another experience in and of itself, phenomenal. um
Yeah, that's another thing because with Indian music, you could say in some ways Bollywood too, but the way it is a part of a movie is more that it is made for a movie, but we share it like we share Indian classical. We just want to share it with everyone. And that's why everybody is so inviting because we want everyone to know our culture. We want to share it. So it's more about that. It's more about the feeling of community because that's India. So uh, all our culture just like rounds up to
it's
having
so
a community. Like,
It's so true. It's so true. But so
yeah.
what else what do you think it really is then about like Bollywood that resonates so much stronger? Is it the lyrics and the intentionality? Is it the simpler way that it's been, like the simpler style that it's played in, rather than classical being that highly technical um a method of playing? Like what do you think it is that really defines like why Bollywood has really caught on, as opposed to classical for the new generation?
Yeah, I think because, well, we have westernized to a large extent. And with that came like this I don't know phase of everybody wanting to have shorter movies because Hindi movies used to be like 3 hours long, and we still have breaks between our movies because that's how it used to be when the movies were 3 hours long. So everything became shorter, including music, and everything got simplified. So I guess that you could call it evolution. I don't know, but it's more of that to listen to it, to appreciate it. It's much easier for me as like a listener who's like working and it's also playing in the background. I can still enjoy the music and get the lyrics and be like, this is amazing, and still not look at each technicality that they like have. And I guess that's more of why a lot of people in my generation have been drawn to Bollywood because it's just easy to appreciate as well. Because, well, there are technicalities there, but they're still like fewer. If you're like, you go in and you have to open all your eyes and ears, just do that. We've lost the patience maybe for it.
Yeah, and I always wonder because I mean I think about this even in the context of like what we consider classical music, like Western classical music, but like it feels like a
Yeah.
lot of music too can sometimes be compartmentalized to like a time and place. Like you have a type of music that you
Yeah.
listen to when you're doing a certain thing, and so it may just be like, I feel like classical music for the younger generation, they still know what it is, at least Western classical, and I'm curious to hear what your thoughts are about like Indian classical music. It's sort of something like maybe you'd study to it, maybe you'd hear it in a movie, but it would be something sort of like you wouldn't like it's got a specific role, and the role is not something that you'd like easy listen to or think to listen to. Um, do you find that
Yeah.
same thing happening with Indian classical as well?
Yes, so we're having these uh We do have Indian classical in Bollywood, but I don't think you can call it completely classical because it's more of a fusion because you're simplifying it, or even if you're not simplifying it, it's shorter, and because it's part of a movie, that's not the sole like focus in that whole like piece of art. You could say that whole performance is the movie, including the song, not just the song. So I guess it's more of a fusion, and we're still keeping the tradition, but we're changing it a little bit. So I guess it's still important that way, and there's a huge population still listening to live, which is great. But I guess at least a lot of people from, I guess, the bigger cities are less knowledgeable about Indian classical, you could say, now than
Yeah.
they were before.
No, that makes sense. I mean, and humor me because I'm just an ignorant American. But I did have so I couldn't help but it appeared to me that a lot of like Indian classical music has taken on a connection to like more like traditions and like festivities and like maybe even like gods and like worship, because like
Yeah,
it was always like every time I'd hear classical music, it'd be in the context of some sort of celebration of some, like whether
yeah.
it be a festival, one of the many amazing festivals that I experienced while in India, or this wedding. Is that something that you've seen as well, where it's taken on this context of like a meaning beyond, because it obviously doesn't have lyrics, so the meaning I feel like in this case may have been pulled from the context upon which you'd hear it in. Is that something that you're seeing with Indian classical?
Uh, yeah, I guess with relation to like traditions and like worshipping, it is because there is a huge history to it, which is like at the core of everything, like our religion, like at least for Hindus. For event like some we have scriptures, and one of them is completely towards like based on music, and it that's why it becomes like a part of what religion is for us. So I guess that's why in a lot of like traditional aspects we include music, because it is a part of our religion as well, and not just Hindus, other religions in India as well. So we have like a huge history just of Indian classical music, and like its varieties, because it's also like divided into regions. So I guess because of the great history that it has, it's gotten like more and more complicated, because it's like people start getting better at it. So and now we're losing like the patience, and like we want everything to go faster, so we're not able to appreciate it as much.
Yeah, there are a couple awesome things there. So like one of the things I think is interesting is like you often do see music tied to religion. I love when it's so intimately tied typically, because I
Yeah.
think music really is something that it helps you engage with your thoughts and feelings and like gets you into a zone of thought. And so it can really help to have music, use the music to put you in a place that's kind of powerful. But the other side of this that you mentioned, I think, is really fascinating. It's something I talked about with a producer on the Chinese U.S. Music Summit at Berkeley last year, which is the regionality between songs. This is something that I don't obviously exists in the U.S. To a
Yeah.
large extent. I mean, it was like there's different Southern music, there's maybe Midwestern artists that are bigger,
Oh yeah.
Chicago, major cities being different. And I was talking to him a little bit about it in terms of like China specifically. But do you know? Are there distinct differences between the regionality of these songs or the way that songs? For instance, if you were to hear a song, would you know what region it was tied to?
I don't have that much knowledge about Indian classical, so I
Sure.
would not exactly know which one it is. But I definitely know that there's a lot of types, including like there's Hindustani, there's Carnatic. So there's different kinds that are related to different regions. but I wouldn't be able to identify it. I would probably able to like guess the language because there's so many languages, but I don't know if I would be able to pinpoint which one it is because it's like so vast.
Yeah, that's such an interesting additional variable too, isn't it? Like the
Yeah.
incredible amount of languages. That's so fun. I mean, and having that makes almost, you know, in terms of intonations, I would guess like almost infinite different variations you could play with too, which is really cool.
Yeah.
But why don't we go into, I know we want to talk a little bit about Bollywood specifically now. So like
Oh,
Indian classical, we've teed up pretty well as something that you know, is steeped in history, is very traditional, is something that's even linked to worship in many different ways. And then you have Bollywood, which is sort of a relatively newer style, relatively newer genre of music in many ways, and something that resonates with younger audiences. But why don't you help us take a dive into some songs that have meaning and to help us understand some meaningful Bollywood songs? I think it'd be fun.
yeah, I can talk about some of the newer ones because uh since there's this notion going on that currently we're having like no meaning in our songs. So I kind of wanted to like talk about some of the very recent songs because I thought they have meaning.
And before you go, I just want to stop you real quick because I think that is such an interesting point. Like, and this is something that we're trying to talk about at SOS more and more too, is that like
Yeah.
just because there's a deluge out there, and maybe it's even all you see of songs
Yeah.
that don't necessarily have meaning, we do not believe that that necessarily means, in fact, we think the opposite, that there are still plenty of meaningful songs. It's just harder than
Yeah.
ever to maybe find them, and the stereotypes typically can be sort of defining in terms of whether or not they're meaningful. But that's why I think it's an important distinction you just made. There are meaningful songs in every genre. I truly believe that. You just have to dig out there and find them. But yeah, walk us through some of these meaningful Bollywood songs.
So the first one I can think of is it's it got really famous actually. The movie was really big in India. It's called Gully Boy, and it's about the life of somebody who's not that rich and is trying to become a rapper, which is a completely westernized idea in India. So uh, and not coming from such a background makes it even harder for like some people to even dream of that, and that's why they made that movie. That it also talks about how rap is sometimes thought of as something that just talks about meaningless things. It can have no meaning. So this movie kind of gave a lot of people a different perspective towards rap, that too in Hindi. So that's why it got really famous. And there's a song called Duri, which is basically him talking about everybody in the world, you could say, even if this was made in the context of India, talks about how we're united, how we're together. But there's like so much distance because Duri means distance. And he's just talking about how much distance there still is because you say that we're equal, we have equal opportunities and equal rights and everything, but still a lot of people are enjoying way more of the privileges of opportunities just because they're born in a certain house, born certain way. So I guess that's really deep in context to the movie as well, because it was based in Mumbai, and there were a lot of people talking about, oh, like if you're not as rich, uh, you're not like any less. But in many ways, they'll prove to the person that he is. So that's the meaning behind it. I think yeah, I also thought about this song called Ik Kudi, which is in Punjabi. but it's also from a Bollywood movie. And that Bollywood movie talked about uh, drugs and people getting involved in it. And it kind of broke a lot of stereotypes because the idea behind it was that everybody chooses to be in it. And it's always the people who are completely wrong. So this song talks about it could translates to one girl, and it talks about a girl who did not have any choice, who was just in the wrong place at the wrong time, and her life completely changed just because she got involved in that situation. And how basically as it's not their fault completely, and even if there is, what's the problem with helping others out? So these are the few songs that I think had a lot of meaning behind them.
Yeah, and I think each one of those issues are so interesting to have chosen.
Mm,
Because first, I mean, with the song from Gully Boy,
yeah,
like the cast issue has always been one that's so interesting to me because it's sort of like you've got this structural inequality is normal almost in most societies, but it's just so
yeah,
interesting because we tend to at least pretend or be rather indirect about it. But the fact
yeah,
that like in India this was cooked in at the beginning is such an
yeah,
interesting thing because I really think that's changed the way that people think about it. Um, because I even like I knew people in India who were young guys my age, right? That were even
yeah,
telling me that like they're gonna have to find somebody, i.e., have someone found for them, perhaps even when they, to marry, that is of the same religion, that is of the same
yeah,
relative class, essentially, because it's not caste anymore, but relative class. And this is such an interesting thing. I mean, and even in the U.S., I mean, it's the idea of do we still have the ability to get ahead and do what we want to do and be who we want to be if we didn't start from the top? Can we start from the bottom and
mm,
still be there? If to speak to Drake, but uh, that's like that is a huge question and issue, and it's really about how you handle that messaging because I really think that that's something that the US in its early days put forward as like our main driver, which really resonated with a lot of people was, you can be, it doesn't matter who you are, it's a land of equal opportunity. And I think that it's
yeah,
these structural inequalities that are in place, whether it's wherever it originates from, that can cause you to not be able to dream big enough. And
yeah,
sometimes too, like society sometimes too, like when you do things that are not normal, like even because even rap in the Western society too is like seen as almost like racially tied, pretty much.
yeah.
Like not only is it something that you shouldn't be doing if you're Indian, for perhaps, although I've liked some of them, like I like Yo Yo Honey Sing and others. Like I think
Yeah,
it's so fun. I love it. But it's like it's these things where, especially when they become very powerful genres, like rap and hip hop now is basically pop. It's what
yeah,
most people are listening to. There always ends up being these identity crises about like who can access this, who is this actually for. And I think that kind of goes against like what the spirit of a lot of the music is, right? Because it's really like, you should be writing music for everybody, and it should be something that people can try. And that's why I think this
yeah,
notion of like genre bending that's been coming out has been quite interesting as well, because I think people are just starting to mix genres in ways that are really creative too, in part because we all have these multiple influences and multiple identities, and maybe we like multiple types of music and we have multiple things that we're into, and you can pull those all together. So I think it pulls all of that together. And I haven't seen Gully Boy yet, but I've certainly heard it's great.
yeah. It's a great movie. I remember at some point in this song, or one of the raps at least, there was this line where he said that I don't want to be Slumdog Millionaire, because all it meant was, if you're after Slumdog Millionaire got famous, and it's like one of the few things that people know about India, and Indian movies. And after that, people were started looking at poor people in India as something of like a tourist site. So there have been like they showed in the movie as well some people visiting them as if it's like a tourist spot, and just seeing how they live, which is kind of, which really brings down their morale because it's like you're just telling them about their condition that they don't want to share, walking into their personal space. And that's why he said that I don't want to be Slumdog Millionaire. I just want to be equal.
Yeah.
So I think that was a really powerful message.
It is difficult, isn't it? Because I remember like when I was first going into Mumbai, I took a train to go in, and I
Yeah,
happened to be sitting. It was one of those sleeper trains. I love those trains, especially getting around India. Um,
yeah,
I happened to be sitting next to someone who I ended up speaking with, and she worked for the government. Um, and it was really interesting because it was interesting talking to her and hearing about sort of some of her perspectives as you look out the window and see these people. I mean, we went for miles with people
yeah,
just pissing and shitting on the train on the train tracks and like living out there. And it was sort of
yeah,
seen as like a welcome to Mumbai, like this is what it's like. Um, and like it's interesting because I saw a similar problem and I had a really weird feeling when I did this when I went to Africa. Like I went to South Africa and I went to a slum in South Africa, and when I was there, everybody was telling me that I should go see these traditional slums. Like I should understand what life is like in these slums, and so I did go.
yeah,
And when you go, you book a tour guide, and the idea is what you do is you make a donation to the
yeah,
slum, and then you go visit and they share their culture with you. But it was a very strange process where it was almost like I felt like I was on a ride, and it made me very uncomfortable because it was like we're walking down this slum, and I mean, it's a slum, right? I mean, it's not great.
yeah,
And we have a kid as a tour guide. We have like stray dogs walking around, and then they're leading us through, and they're telling us how like their piping works and how they use like outhouses and like how their homes are and what some of the markings on the walls are. It just was all very, very strange, I thought. And then we ended up at this very, very small room. Like I would have decided it was like a closet, but what it was open the door up, and there were like easily 30 kids in there and one woman, and they just burst out into song because they're saying, hey, there are people, we're welcoming people to our village, to our slum. We sing for these people. And it was one of the strangest experiences in my life where I felt like both a gawker, um, but also like I I just didn't know how to, I didn't know how to react. But it
yeah,
was really, and then you have these kids jumping into your arms too as they're singing, going like, hello, welcome to, like, hi. And they were just adorable, adorable children. And I really was super conflicted because, to your point, it's like it's this thing where you don't want to, you have these ingrained things that people come to view as stereotypes of how you live and who you are,
yeah,
and it can become almost like theater and like entertainment or tourism to have these
yeah.
components, because South Africa for the most part is not defined in that way. Now, unfortunately, most of Africa still struggles with a lot of those issues, and these are real. I'm not diminishing these massive problems. I'm just saying like the tourist notion of it was a very strange one, and it was even one that I contributed to and experienced, and it was very strange, very, very strange.
Yeah, I think if somebody comes in and talks to them, they would be welcoming. Uh, but if it's like invading personal space,
Yeah,
then it's at some levels humiliating sometimes, because it's not something that everybody approves of. It's almost as if somebody walking into your home just as a part of a tour of your country.
yeah.
So that would be odd.
That's a good way of thinking about it. Yeah,
And
wouldn't that be so weird if someone walked down a suburb or something of like the, and was like, so these are the homes of like this.
yeah,
Let's go to the door and see if they're home. Like it was just a very strange notion. I get it,
yeah,
but I mean, Indian people in particular, and you hit on this as well, are just so welcoming. Um, which is another aspect of the culture that I just loved in general. I just thought was like phenomenal. But then, so another one of the issues that you brought up was this, like the role of women in society has been another, tough thing around the world, but in particular in India. And there's issues of like opportunity. There's issues of violence. There's a lot of these different issues that are occurring too. Because even this is another issue that I unfortunately have some connection to. Because when I was living in Bangalore, I lived in an apartment in Bangalore, and as part of a program. So I came in as part of this program. I was working for a venture fund there, and they gave, as part of the job, they gave you housing because they basically said, "We're taking, you're going from U.S. to India." I was like, do they have Zillow? No, I was like, do they have Craigslist? I don't know. How am I going to find an apartment? So they found this apartment for me as part of the program. And after I left, and I didn't hear about this for over a year later, maybe a year and a half later, when I actually went back and was sitting with the director of our program then on my second trip to India. She told me that in my same apartment, after I had left, they brought in another fellow who happened to be a woman. And in my apartment, one day she's at home in her apartment, which was where I lived, was sitting at home, hears a knock on the door, opens the door and is immediately attacked by a man. In her own apartment, attacked by a man who attempted to rape her. Thankfully, she did not come out unscathed, both mentally and physically, but thankfully it did not happen because she was able to scream and fight him off enough that other people were around who came downstairs and actually helped. But it's unbelievable the direct ties you can hear to these things. And there are very real issues around gender around the world, but it's just interesting when you hear them tried to be discussed or interacted with via media. I think it helps us all think about it and present and share some of these stories in a different way.
Yeah, it was, according to the movie, it was more based on how people get into drugs. But there was this one girl who was, of course, not involved in it. And she just wanted to, I think, represent India in hockey. But again, she was not from a very rich family. So she was still dreaming that, but had not come true as of yet. And she found drugs one day, and I think it was to find some money. And she got into this whole web of this whole drug, uh, you could say, issue in India. And because of that, it just represented so much in terms of how people, like, and women especially, get stuck into some things that were not even meant to be, like, they were not even meant to be a part of, they didn't even mean to do, and they lose their opportunities, their confidence, their you could say, they lose their innocence very early because of these incidents. Like, you could be at home and not feel safe. And that's why it has started all these, you could say, that's why it's being represented in music more, because they know they're representing the problem now.
Yeah.
Because there has to be a point when you acknowledge that.
And the innocence aspect is such an interesting one too, because I really think that it's one that's both like for instance, you hear these things of like, and luckily I think some of this is going away, in large part maybe is already gone. Like, you hear about these things where like women can't even go out to clubs or bars because it's viewed as like not something that women are too innocent to go do those things, or that's not what a woman does, right? And it was interesting because like, not there's that, but then another thing that I came across, which was actually in a really funny context, is I went to a stand-up comedy show in
Mhm.
Bangalore, and I was stricken. Honestly, I don't remember any of the. I remember some of them vaguely, but there's only one comic that I really remember very well, because she was like a 12-year-old girl, uh, and she got up, and her whole set was about how basically she had lost her innocence living in India because this is maybe inappropriate, but I hope it doesn't take you the wrong way, but the first dick she had ever seen was a guy peeing in the street. And she was like joking about how much that screwed her up because like she's like a young girl, like 6 years old, and like there's this guy pissing in the street, and she sees this like she sees it. And it was like it was all about like the loss of innocence for a young girl that sort of led her to do stand-up comedy. It was kind of like it was a joke, but it got me thinking about how like these aspects of society can kind of wake you up and like help, force maturity on you in weird ways. And that's a very obscure
Yeah.
example, but there are many others that are, intimately tied with cultures, not just in India, but abroad as well.
Yeah, it's more of, you could say, that a lot of times we're just not, we don't imagine that something can be like so much, cause so much effect on our mental health, and on how we are as a person, just like because we did not think that we would ever be in that situation. And now that we are, we just don't know how to deal with it, and that's like the main cause of how it completely makes the person change, makes them mature early. It's more because of like we just don't know how to deal with all that, because it's like just new territory for us.
Yeah, and you can't deny the impact that like environment has on shaping you. Environment in a broad sense being defined as not only how people act when they see you, so like they see you as a man or a woman or whatever they might see about you and then act accordingly, but also like individualized experiences that you have. They could have lasting impacts in the way that you think and the way that you have to act and the way that you present yourself too.